these days, the plane makers say, are increasingly foolproof. Yet most crashes are put down to human error. So how much blame belongs to the men and how much to the machines?
Final call, British Midland Flight PD92 to Belfast.
The shuttle run to Belfast usually needs little more than a safe pair of hands.
Well, I was just really looking forward to getting home. I'd been over in London at the London Boat Show doing some business. So I was just looking forward to getting back home, going home, seeing my wife, seeing my baby.
My wife had dropped me at Heathrow Airport so I could go back to work again on the Monday morning.
The captain was one of the airline's most experienced, one of the old school, flying a brand new state-of-the-art Boeing 737-400. A reassuring combination of steadiness and sophistication.
I was over in London attending an engineering exhibition in connection with my work. I had a busy day. It was a good day and I felt it was completed when I had sat down on the plane.
Tower, Midland 92, ready for departure.
Midland 92, you are clear for takeoff.
Midland 92, call London on 133.7 for further climb.
Roger 92. London, this is Midland 92.
Good evening, Midland 92. You are identified. Turn left onto 350 and you're clear to climb to flight level 300.
These are actors. Their script is taken from the cockpit voice recorder. The plane was climbing to its cruising altitude through 28,000 feet.
We got a fire coming through.
Which one is it now?
It's the right one.
Okay, throttle it back.
Will I give a call then?
Yep.
Hi, London. It's the Midland 92. We have an emergency situation at the moment. It's looking like an engine fire. We're attempting to close the engine down. We'll keep you advised.
Roger, Midland 92.
We're level 300.
Shut it.
Okay. Into the checklist.
It was an emergency, but there was no panic. The aircraft was designed to fly on one engine.
Okay, APU engines. Seems to be running all right now. Let's just see if it comes in.
Midland 92, for your information, you're about 30 miles to the east of Birmingham at this time. Wish to go to Birmingham or Castle Donington?
Castle Donington, I think. I'll just check if we can get in. I will take it by the looks of things to Castle Donington. Can you stand by on that one, please? Okay. Engine failure.
Calmly, they began the shutdown drill.
Seems we've stabilized.
Ladies and gentlemen, nothing to worry about. Could you fasten your safety belts for the moment? Thank you.
For about 10 or 12 minutes after we'd taken off, we were climbing quite steeply, and all of a sudden there was a loud banging, clanging noise coming from the outside of the aircraft, and the sort of shuddering. I realised something was wrong then. Chris turned to me and said, you know, that's got to be an engine.
Then actually started serving the meals, and there was a bang from the engine just to my left, and some sparks from it, and at that point we knew we were in some trouble.
Yeah, we've had an engine running rough, and we've been getting some smoke into the cockpit, which by shutting the engine down looks like we've stopped it.
Okay.
What's it say?
Still no fire. Accomplish engine shutdown only when flight conditions permit.
Shut it.
Can you give position, please? Midland 92, could you give souls on board?
Say again, just stand by. Shut it down.
Okay. We've got thrust closed.
For the next 20 minutes, the plane flew normally to East Midlands Airport, its new destination. But the pilots had closed down the wrong engine, the perfectly healthy right-hand one.
Are you happy enough for the diversion to East Midlands?
Yep.
Okay, London at Midland 92, we are now diverting to East Midlands. We have 117 souls plus 1, and the crew complement is +8 on that.
You can start a right-hand turn. You're about 5 miles northwest of East Midlands at this time.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hunt. Sorry I didn't get back to you a few minutes ago. We've been having a little bit of a problem with our right-hand engine. It's produced some smoke into the cabin. We've closed the engine down. That in itself is no problem at all.
From most of the passengers' point of view, certainly where Noel and I were sitting, it was clear it was the left-hand engine. And we heard the skipper say he turned off the other side.
They just presumed what was our left and right from a passenger's point of view, that maybe there was a different way of describing this.
It never crosses your mind to think that, you know, somebody should go up and hammer on the door and say, hang about, it's the other side, pal.
A few minutes. I do hope you're feeling a little bit better about it now. There's actually no problem here at all. Thank you.
As they nursed the craft back to East Midlands, the priority now was to recompute the new bearing on the automatic navigation system.
The ILS, she's not taking the ILS.
East Midlands weather, when you're ready.
Go ahead.
250 degrees at 10 knots. 10 kilometers visibility, 7 octaves at 1700 feet.
1018 Midland 92. Doesn't seem to want to take the selections, Kevin.
Go back to the initial approach, that one index approach.
It should give me the thing whenever we go for the alternative.
Yeah.
It's pulling up the...
There was no apparent need to review their actions. All seemed well. When they tried, there were frequent interruptions from the ground.
Now, what indications did we actually get? Just rapid vibrations on the aeroplane and smoke?
Smoke. Smoke coming into the cockpit.
Midland 92, continue that left turn onto 150 in East Midlands.
150, Midland 92.
15 minutes into the emergency. The crew were confidently on course for a single-engine landing. They'd seen nothing to warn them that they were flying on the wrong one.
Midland 92, 4 miles from touchdown, wind check 240, 15 knots.
Midland 92 and we're visual.
Roger.
Okay, you got 151.
Thanks, mate.
It's set. Checks are complete. Do you want to have your rudder zeroed? Are you happy enough?
Yes, please, wouldn't mind. Oh, bloody hell. There are the blue flashing lights turning out.
Yeah.
Midland 92, this is Tower. Which engine is shut down, please?
We've shut down number 2 engine. That's the right-hand engine.
Just confirm.
Jesus, we're having trouble with our second engine now as well. Come on!
Try lighting the other one up. There's nothing else to do, mate.
Minimum.
Copy that, Tower. We've got problems with both engines.
We got both engines now giving us trouble.
Yes, that's copied. That is copied, 92.
Firebell number 1.
Yeah.
240
Well, I shut it.
15
No.
There's no keeping her. Try and stretch her, Kevin.
We'll try stretching this glide if we're going to undershoot.
Roger, understood. 240. That's
She's
all
not
copied.
going.
Try opening the other one up.
She's not going, Kev. Try the clear area in the right there. Try from the clear area.
Prepare for crash landing. Prepare for crash landing. Shit! Not the motorway.
It was like a fairground ride, but it didn't stop. It just kept going down, and you could almost feel the ground coming up to meet the aircraft. You just knew this is going to be very, very bad.
Coming into the crash was totally silent, no noise whatsoever, and I had the impression that everyone had sort of taken a breath and was waiting for that when we actually touched down, and it just didn't come.
It was a double impact. There was a slight impact when we hit the opposite bank of the M1, and then the main impact when we hit the hard shoulder, and that was incredible. I just literally felt my back explode.
With the extra stress on the already damaged engine during the final approach, a broken fan blade had been sucked into the engine, ripping it to shreds. The safety of East Midlands runway had been just yards away.
It was a very surreal scene. It was a scene of utter devastation. The seats were upside down, there were seats on the ceiling, there were seats... It was just as if a child's toy had been just rattled inside, and everything was in total disarray.
39 people were killed outright. 8 more died later of their injuries. Daybreak brought a clearer view of the wreckage and, for the accident investigators, a dawning recognition of its cause. The pilots had turned off a perfectly healthy engine and flown a damaged one to the point of destruction. Soon their private assessment had become a public verdict: pilot error. The question was how 2 experienced pilots could have made such a mistake. At the inquest, the pilots frankly admitted both their error and their bafflement at how they could have made it. The reason why went largely by default, when who to blame was so much easier. The official report said the pilots had acted contrary to training. McClelland was sacked, Hunt was retired, a sentence confirming the by now accepted verdict of pilot error.
The basic understanding of pilot error is they, the pilots, messed it up. They made a mistake, they completely went off the rails.
The typical man that's in the street, he's going to say pilot error. And his interpretation of pilot error, I think, is going to be quite simply that the pilots got it wrong. They made a mistake. They didn't do their job as they should have done it.
Public disgrace for pilot error. But the passengers think that's too narrow a verdict.
I must say that I personally hold no grudge against them at all. I don't have an axe to grind against them. Like me, they were human beings who were caught up in an accident.
And sure, there was some pilot error, we know that from the report, but it's only part of the picture. The training, the backup, you know, the quality systems that go into put an aircraft like that in the air have to be absolutely right, and they clearly weren't.
They've done the job to the best of their ability, given the circumstances and surroundings, and yet, at the end of the day, everyone points the finger. Oh yes, that's the plane that the pilots turned off the engine. They may be contributory, but they certainly are not the reason for that plane crashing. They're one small cog in a wheel.
Wasn't it pilot error?
We certainly made a mistake. Well, we both made mistakes. Certainly not deliberately, and the question that we would like to answer is why did we make those mistakes?
The first question, was it a mistake or a mischance? As the plane climbed, a fan blade snapped in the left-hand engine. The first indication the pilots had was juddering and a smell of burning. The crew's training hadn't prepared them to identify this set of symptoms.
We got a fire. Which one is it now?
Their instruments didn't alert them to which engine was at fault. The trusted option was trial and error.
You've got a choice of 2, left or right. If you're uncertain, throttle it back. If it doesn't work, advance it and start again. It did work. We had well, so far as we were concerned, it completely cured the vibration, and various other things went away as well. We thought we got our problem identified.
Closing the healthy engine seemed to have cured the problem in the damaged one. The plane had an autothrottle. This automatically adjusts the flow of fuel to each engine to equalize their performance. Because the left engine was damaged, it was less efficient. So the autothrottle just pumped in more fuel to compensate. This caused the engine to judder and surge. Shutting down the right engine by hand disengaged the autothrottle feeding both engines, so the oversupply of fuel to the left engine was stopped. So by throttling back the healthy engine, it cured the problem?
Gave all the indications of curing the problem, yeah. I can only say it gave all the indications now. So far as we were concerned then, it cured the problem.
On its descent to East Midlands, little power was required of the left engine. Unstressed, it behaved quite normally. At this point, only a clear indication from the instruments could have shaken the pilots' confidence that, by luck and judgment, they'd picked the correct engine to shut down first time. But they saw nothing to give them reason to reconsider what they'd done.
We had an unusual emergency here. There wasn't a big red light flashing on one of the engines that would have told them which one to do. They got a rather ill-defined emergency, and of course that's just the situation under which you've got to ensure that the instrumentation is designed as well as possible.
It certainly should have been well designed. Boeing had spared no effort to equip its new plane, the latest version of the world-beating 737, with a computer-driven high-tech cockpit. Out went old-fashioned dials with big white needles. But no one had reprogrammed the traditional perceptions of old-fashioned pilots.
It's a computer-generated idea to deal with computers, and the human mind doesn't quite see it the same way or as quickly. Talks very nicely to computers, but not to a human brain.
Research into the design of this sort of dial has been carried out at the RAF Institute of Aviation Medicine. The new dials are harder to read and easier to misinterpret.
The old-style cockpit in, for example, the 737-300 aircraft had apparently largish instruments with large white needles on. In the 400 series aircraft, the big white needles have been replaced with very, very much smaller cursors, and it takes longer to actually read the cursors than it does the big white needles.
The indicators on the new instruments are outside the dial. The little yellow cursors are 1/3 the length of the old-fashioned needles, simulated here on the computer. So there was no clear contradiction of the pilot's assumption that they'd solved their problem.
Yeah, we've had an engine running rough, and we've been getting some smoke into the cockpit, which by closing the engine down looks like we've stopped it.
Nothing then on the flight deck told them in words of one syllable, loud and clear, that they hadn't shut down the correct engine, and so that they were quite happy that they had.
The left engine vibration gauge was reading high. It's the size of a 20-pence piece, but it was the only indication the pilots had that all was not well.
What there was a small cursor showing an out-of-range reading on one instrument.
There was an instrument saying, "Excuse me, but I think," rather than "Hey, look."
Yes, very polite instrument indeed.
But that discreet warning was all there was to correct their false and fatal assumption.
The location of that instrument on the panel itself is in a secondary position. So therefore, it is obviously not classified as something that carries primary importance. The design of the gauge itself, it doesn't have red danger zone markings whenever you reach maximum values, as other secondary instruments possess.
Over history, vibration meters have been looked at a little bit askance as not being totally reliable. Apparently, these new machines are, in fact, extremely reliable. This is something we would like to have known at the time.
Kevin Hunt had had 7,000 hours experience on planes like the DC-9, where vibration gauges were so unreliable that pilots were actually allowed to fly with them disconnected. On the new 737-400, the gauge was extremely accurate, but the pilots might not have believed it, even if they'd managed to see it.
Obviously, vibration and vibration gauges hadn't been at the front of anybody's mind, really, because these gauges weren't provided with a warning light, and if people had regarded them as important, then they would have been. Had there been an out-of-range warning, a flashing light or something like that attached to this, that probably the accident wouldn't have happened.
The official report recommended that vibration gauges be fitted with a device to attract the pilot's attention. But the CAA rejected the recommendation on the grounds that such warning devices would give the gauge a disproportionate significance. It was a selling point of the new 737 that the instruments were simply a more sophisticated version of those in the old plane. That meant that the airlines who bought it wouldn't have to waste valuable pilot time intensively retraining their crews. For British Midland, at its Castle Donington headquarters, as for any other airline, all that was needed to license a pilot for the new plane was a minimal pilot conversion course.
The basic conversion course onto the 400 was at East Midlands, and it consisted of a lecture, a slide lecture, over the course of a morning and part of an afternoon. And that was it.
This booklet, comparing the 737-400 with the 300, completed the theoretical training.
The training that we did have in no way prepared us for the emergency that we had that night. And because there was no 400 simulator available for this aircraft, we went through a very informal ground school, followed by a test paper, a multi-choice test paper.
There was no simulator training because there was no such facility in Britain at the time. Ray Thilthorpe, who left the RAF Red Arrows for British Midland, was surprised at how short the course was.
I only knew of one other training system, and that's a military training system. So here I come onto the scene and I go through a system which is quite alien to me. I was very uncomfortable with it. I was uncomfortable in that the style of putting information across, 35mm slides with an American voiceover just telling me what each slide does, is not enough. It's not deep enough.
Pilots got their hands-on training on regular scheduled flights. This, passengers may like to know, is standard and accepted practice in the industry.
I found that after doing that course, I was still almost learning to fly the aeroplane by default, wanting to put my hands on things, say, what does this do? What does this do? But yet it was signed up in my license saying that I was qualified on that type, but I was still saying, hey, look at this. There's something, I didn't know that.
The routine of shuttle flights would give the pilots time to get to know the plane, as long as nothing went wrong.
Because they hadn't done a simulator detail before flying the aircraft, that means that although they'd already done a number of sectors on this aircraft with this new instrumentation, the first time that they ever saw the instrumentation showing them a problem was when they'd got a real problem, because they'd never seen it showing a problem in the simulator.
The official report recommends that all crews should have simulator training. The CAA agrees that it's a good idea, but passengers again may like to know, rejected the recommendation because simulators are not always available. There'd have been no pilot error if there'd been no engine failure in the first place, an obvious fact obscured by loading the blame on the pilots.
The engine was less than 3 months old. It had very little time in service, and yet there was a major disruption within that engine. An engine that should have been tested, designed and certified to a very high standard, and really permitted that engine and aircraft to be flying perhaps in 20-25 years' time.
Boeing's new 737 was bigger than its predecessor. It was going to need a larger engine. There was a good market for whoever could supply it. The CFN 56 series had powered the old plane. A simple upgrade seemed all that was necessary to increase the thrust of the engine.
The only way to increase the thrust of an engine is to increase the speed at which it rotates. And to get an increase of thrust of, shall we say, 6%, 7%, you only need to increase the speed by 2 or 3%. So it's quite a small change.
GEC made the original engine. They, with the French firm Snecma, were the obvious choice to upgrade it. As it needed so small an extra percentage of speed, the manufacturers didn't consider it necessary to spend time and money testing it in the air. Running it on a factory test bed would, they believed, adequately simulate the stresses of increased speed.
And that gave them the higher speeds that they wanted, but it didn't give them the same operating condition for the fan.
Failure to test the engine at altitude was fatal. An aerodynamic phenomenon called flutter stresses the fan blades. Flutter can't be accurately predicted.
The problem is that nobody properly understands flutter. The aerodynamic cause of the flutter is not properly understood. And there are possible mechanisms or causes of flutter which are not really understood at all.
The combination of speed, temperature and altitude resulted in catastrophic flutter, conditions the makers had never tested.
Well, what they should have done, and this is widely recognized, I'm sure, by the manufacturers as well as by other people, is they should have either tested it on an aircraft at the full range of conditions, or they should have tested it in a facility which simulated high altitude.
6 months after the Kegworth crash, 2 more 737s suffered identical engine failure. There was clearly a fatal design flaw in the engine.
I'm told that they no longer even consider building that type of engine. It's been completely redesigned. The fact is that if it had been redesigned in the first place, it may well not have had this problem.
The official report recommends that all new engines be tested at altitude. But like recommendations on vibration gauges and simulator training, the Civil Aviation Authority has reserved its position. The CAA has a duty to protect the travelling public, but it has another duty to regulate and protect the interests of commercial aviation. Kegworth survivors worry if both duties can be comfortably upheld. 4 years before Kegworth, an engine fire on the runway at Manchester caused the death of 55 people on a charter plane. The pilot hadn't been able to see which engine was burning.
After the Manchester fire disaster, one of the recommendations of the CAA was that tail cameras should be fitted to the aircraft. If the CAA's recommendation had been acted on, our plane would not have crashed because the captain would have been able to see which engine was faulty.
The CAA had received advice about external cameras in the 70s, then after Manchester, now after Kegworth. None will be fitted for years.
So they're still making the same recommendations in spite of all the pain, the suffering, the deaths. It seems a bit of a waste.
The motorway crash at Kegworth wrecked the lives of scores of families. Simply to blame the pilots means there may be 2 more casualties. The truth and the safety of passengers on future flights.
I liked to think while I was lying in a hospital bed for months that at least, okay, wow, I'm lucky. Gosh, it's unfortunate for all those other people, but at least something, you know, this can never happen again. And I've been very disappointed. Initially, for the first year, I was disappointed that nothing seemed to happen very quickly. Now, more than 2 years later, I'm frankly very annoyed that I just have the impression nothing is going to happen. It will go away with time.
The industry have used the pilots as a scapegoat. They've made it out that the 2 pilots we had were somehow dud pilots, but the fact of the matter is they were not dud pilots, they were quite experienced line pilots, and I feel that 2 other pilots in the same circumstances could well have reacted similarly.
Any pilot's performance is a product of the training that he's had and the equipment that you give him to operate. And if you give him training that doesn't equip him to deal with the situation, then are you going to call it pilot error if he gets it wrong when that situation crops up? And equally, if you give him equipment which isn't as easy to use as it could have been, are you going to blame the pilot who maybe gets it wrong when he hasn't got very long time to sort it out?
Pilot error is a very neat term. Really what they're saying is the last 2 people to touch the aircraft were at fault, and the last 2 people to touch it were the pilots. The people that designed it, the people that manufactured it, the people that certified it, they got it all right, but the 2 chaps that sat at the front end, they were the last to touch it, they got it wrong. So it straight away brushes really all the problems below the mat.
Everybody's forgotten a lot of things, except maybe David and myself. We are the easy option. The cheap option, if you wish. Just to bury the facts about other odds and ends and leave it as what is now known as pilot error.